We got a good question from our buddy Thomas on Twitter. He says, quick question, I just got my blue belt, now what? What do I work on? Is there anything specific? So Thomas, thanks for the question, brother. And let me say that I'm going to give you my interpretation of blue belt, sort of my expectation of it, which may be different than your coach's. And the reason I sort of say that is because Jiu-Jitsu does not have some one standard or some sort of governing body that tells you exactly how you're supposed to do it. So we're sort of free to do what we want. And so I'm going to share my expectation, my thought process on blue belt. But again, consult with your coach because they may have a different path that they want you to go for that particular belt. But if you were one of my blue belts, what I would tell you is you need to get on the buffet line. And what I mean by that is if you think about, if you've ever been to a buffet, you go there, you take a plate, and you start to like grab a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You sit down at your table, you eat. I don't like that. That tastes pretty good. Okay. Then you put your plate away, you go get another plate. And then you're like, okay, that was good. I want to take more of that. And I like that. I want to take more of that. So using that sort of idea, once you're a blue belt, you've climbed up out of the water because when you first start, you feel like you're drowning, and so you finally get to dry land and maybe climb up on a little hill. That's what blue belt is. You're basically a good white belt. It's not a big hill, it's a little hill, but you're out of the water. You're not drowning anymore. And so now it's time to sample techniques, just like that buffet line. You got to find out what's going to work for you, what's not going to work for you, because everybody's style is going to be a little bit different. Our body types and the things that we favor, all these different factors go into it. And so your job as a blue belt, at least in my eyes, is to get on that technical buffet line and say, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this, and this. You can go back to the gym, start to try them out, see what works. I don't like this one. This position seems to work, but this one, get rid of this one. And I'm just going to focus on this for a little while. Because this to me is the idea of blue belt, because as you've now set a foundation for your game and you have at least a little buffer where you kind of know that you can beat some people, but you're still chasing those mountains in front of you, right? The purple belts, black belts, brown belts, things like that. That's your goal is to now expand your game, right? You've got the foundation set, you've got your core set. Now it's time to expand and build upon that thing. Now, the biggest problem that I personally had and that you might have as a blue belt is that you now have a target on your back. Right? Because when the white belts come in, and you might have experienced this too, I know that for as a white belt, the first time I submitted a blue belt, I was like, yes, I submitted a blue belt, I'm getting better. So those white belts are going to come at you, right? Because they're there to test themselves, and they're like, man, they're still trying to climb up on to that little hill that you're on, right? They're trying to get there. And so when they get in there, they're going to try to go after you. And so what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you balance this drive to continue to climb those new mountains, right? But you've also got to continue to experiment at the same time. And the problem with the experimentation is that, like against the purple belts and brown belts and black belts, it's a little bit easier to lose because you're like, I'm supposed to. But those guys below you, sometimes when you're playing around with new techniques, it can be really difficult because that's kind of your buffer. Like you're going to lose to these guys, but you feel like you're supposed to beat these guys because you got this different colored dyed piece of cotton around your waist. Be careful to fall into that trap though, because I know that for me, one of the biggest limiting factors in my game was the fact that I felt like that once I was either beating someone or once I was above them in rank, whether that be a belt or a stripe, that I was always supposed to beat them. And that was a huge limiting factor for my game. The minute that I finally got rid of that was the moment that my game, and it's a long story for a different video, but the minute that happened, my game shot up. Because I was able to just play. I was able to get out of my own way and just play around with techniques, experiment. And so you want to do that sooner than later, because the sooner that you can start to play with new weapons, the better off you'll be. So my advice to you would be, one, when you go against those purple belts, black belts, brown belts, roll with your best stuff, because again, you're still chasing them. You're just like the white belts that are going to be rolling with you now, where they're trying to test themselves. You're trying to ultimately test yourself against them and see where you're at. Now, with the guys below you, my advice to you to make your game even better, faster, would be to, when you roll with them, don't use your best stuff. Think about some techniques, right? Some stuff you'd like to build upon. Again, going to that buffet line, right? Take a look at some of the techniques out there online or from your coach or wherever. See what kind of looks cool, something you think might work for you, and take that technique and work on it. A lot of times I did a private lesson with one of my students one time, and what we did was we set in a game plan where we had his A game and his B game. His B game was what he would use against guys he knew he could beat, and his A game was the game he would use against guys he couldn't beat. And so when he would roll with those guys that were weaker than him or not as experienced or not as skilled, he would use his B game. And so I would tell you to define a B game for yourself, and then focus on that when you roll with people that are now under you. This way you can start shooting for new weapons and adding new tools into the game, because what will happen is eventually those weapons that you're using against the weaker people, they'll find themselves, sort of into your A game at some point. So that is my advice for you, Thomas. Good luck to you, brother, and congratulations on your blue belt.